My children think I had it easy. They don't say it out loud, not in those words, but I hear it in the way they talk about their lives, their struggles, their stress, the long hours, the traffic, the emails that never stop, the pressure to always be doing more, earning more, becoming more. They think their world is harder than the one I came from. And maybe in some ways it is. But what they don't know is what I gave up so they could live it. My name is Frank Delaney. I'm 79 years old and I live alone in a small house in Ohio, the same one my wife and I bought almost 50 years ago when the paint was fresh and the roof didn't leak and the yard felt like a promise instead of a chore. The neighborhood's changed since then. New families, new cars, new faces that don't recognize mine. But I've stayed. I've always stayed. Most mornings, I wake up before dawn, old habit from years of early shifts. I make coffee in the same chipped mug I've had since my 40s and sit at the kitchen table while the house creaks awake around me. My phone sits nearby, face down. Some days I check it. Most days I don't. My kids text, sometimes. Short messages, pictures of grandkids, links to things they think I'd find funny. I read them all. I always do. But I rarely write back more than a sentence or two, not because I don't care, but because I don't know how to put everything I feel into words that fit on a screen. They live in another world. My son Mark works in tech out in Seattle. Glass buildings, standing desks. Words I still don't fully understand. My daughter Claire is a marketing manager in Chicago, always in meetings, always in a rush, always telling me she'll call when things slow down. They're good kids. They really are, smart, driven, kind in their own way. They just don't know me. Not the man I was. Not the choices I made. Not the life I didn't live. To them, I'm just Dad, the quiet one, the one who worked at the same place forever, the one who never traveled much, the one who still clips coupons and fixes things instead of replacing them, the one who doesn't quite get their world. They've never asked why, and I've never told them. I grew up poor, not the kind of poor people talk about now, where you still have a phone and a TV and a car, just older ones. The kind of poor where you wore the same coat for years and hoped it would last another winter. The kind where dinner was whatever could be stretched the farthest. The kind where college was a word you heard on the radio, not something anyone expected you to do. My father worked at the steel mill until it closed. My mother cleaned houses. I started working at 16, sweeping floors at a machine shop after school, handing over most of my pay to help keep the lights on. There were no dreams of finding yourself. There was just work, and more work. But even then, I had one. I wanted to be a teacher. I loved books, loved learning, loved the way a good explanation could light something up inside you. I used to stay late at school just to help in the library, breathing in the smell of old pages, imagining myself standing in front of a classroom one day, chalk in hand, showing kids how the world fit together. My guidance counselor once told me I had a knack for it, said I should think about college. I went home that day feeling like I'd been handed a key to a door I didn't know existed. But keys don't mean much if there's no way to reach the door. When my father lost his job, the idea of college vanished. I quit school halfway through my senior year and went full-time at the machine shop. 12-hour shifts, loud machines, grease under my nails that never quite came out. I told myself it was temporary, just until things got better. Things rarely get better on their own. I met my wife Helen there. She worked in the office, keeping the books, smiling at everyone even when the days were long. We were both young, both tired, both looking for something steady in a world that didn't offer much. We married fast, bought this little house, started a family before we'd even figured out who we were yet. And just like that, My dream became something I kept folded away, like an old photograph at the bottom of a drawer. Life filled the space where it used to be. Diapers, night shifts, bills, broken cars, school lunches, doctor visits, roof repairs, all the things that make up a life no one writes books about. I stayed at that shop for 42 years. 42. I watched machines change, watched bosses come and go, watched my hair turn grey and my back start to ache before I hit 50. I never complained. Not out loud, anyway. Complaining didn't pay the mortgage. Complaining didn't put food on the table. So I worked. Overtime when it was offered, weekends when it was needed. I missed school plays, missed soccer games, missed birthdays sometimes. I told myself it was for them, and it was. But some nights, driving home in the dark, hands stiff on the wheel, I wondered what it was doing to me. My kids grew up thinking this was normal. Dad goes to work. Dad comes home tired. Dad eats dinner quietly. Dad falls asleep in his chair. That was me. Reliable. Predictable. Invisible. When Mark got into college, I was proud in a way I don't know how to describe. When Claire followed a few years later, I felt like maybe, just maybe, all of it had meant something. We helped where we could. Loans, second mortgages, more overtime. I didn't tell Helen how scared I was every time we signed another paper. I just smiled and said, "It'll be fine." Because that's what fathers do. They don't see the nights you lie awake, counting numbers in the dark. They don't see the dreams you stop having because there's no room for them anymore. They just see the life that shows up every day and keeps going. Now my kids are grown, successful, busy. They talk about promotions and vacations and stress like it's the worst thing in the world. And I listen. I really do. I nod. I say I'm proud of them, because I am. But sometimes, when the call ends and the house goes quiet again, I sit there with the phone in my hand and think, if only you knew. If only you knew what it cost to build the life you take for granted. Not because I want thanks, not because I want praise, but because I want them to know me. Not just as dad, but as the boy who wanted to teach, as the man who stayed when he could have tried to leave, as the person who made choices that shaped all of us, even when no one noticed. They don't know what I gave up for them. And most days, I tell myself that's okay. Most days really are the same. That's the truth of getting old. The world stops throwing surprises at you and instead hands you long stretches of sameness, broken only by small things. A doctor's appointment, a call from one of the kids, a new ache that wasn't there yesterday. You learn to measure time in quieter ways. But one morning, not long ago, something changed. I woke up with a pain in my chest that didn't fade when I sat up. Not sharp, not crushing, just a deep, heavy pressure, like someone had set a weight right on top of my heart. I sat there on the edge of the bed, breathing slow, telling myself it was probably nothing. Gas, a pulled muscle, old bones doing what old bones do. Still, I didn't like it. I drove myself to the urgent care clinic a few miles away, hands steady on the wheel even though my mind was. They hooked me up to wires, took my blood pressure, asked me questions I'd heard before. In the end, they said it wasn't a heart attack, just a warning, a reminder, high blood pressure, stress, age catching up. The doctor looked at me over her glasses and said, "You need to take it easier, Mr. Delaney. And you should think about who you want around if something serious ever does happen." Who I want around. That stuck with me. I went home with a bottle of pills and a head full of thoughts. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the morning light on the floor, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself imagine what it would be like if I wasn't here tomorrow. Not in a dramatic way, just realistically. Who would come? Who would stand around the grave? What would they say about me? He worked hard. He was a good provider. He loved his family. All true, but not the whole truth. That afternoon, I called Mark. He answered on the third ring, breathless, like he'd been running between meetings. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied, the way fathers do. "Just wanted to hear your voice." He laughed. "You all right? You never call in the middle of the day." I almost told him then, about the clinic, about the warning, about the weight I'd been carrying for decades, but I could hear the noise in the background, the rush of his life pressing in. So I didn't. We talked about the weather, about his kids, about nothing at all, and then he said he had to go. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. That night, Claire called. She sounded tired, her voice thin at the edges. She told me about a deadline that was driving her crazy, about a presentation she was worried she'd mess up. I listened. I told her she'd do great, because she always had. When she finally paused, I said, "You ever think about how different things were when you were kids?" She chuckled. "Different how?" "Just simpler," I said. "Harder in some ways, easier in others." "Dad," she said gently, "you always say that. You guys had it rough, but you made it work." We made it work. I ended the call and sat there in the dim light of the living room, those words echoing in my head. Made it work. As if it had all just fallen into place on its own. As if there hadn't been nights when I sat in my truck outside the house, engine off, dreading going inside because I didn't know how much more I had left to give. That was the night I took out the old box from the closet. The one with the things I almost never looked at. Inside were papers and photographs I'd kept over the years. Helen's handwriting on a grocery list from decades ago. Mark's first report card. Claire's kindergarten drawing of our family, with me drawn taller than everyone else, smiling big. And at the bottom, a folder. My high school transcripts. A letter from that guidance counselor. And a half-filled college application I had never sent. I sat there on the floor, back against the couch, and let the past spread out in front of me. I hadn't touched those papers in years. I told myself they didn't matter anymore. That dreams from a lifetime ago had no place in the life I'd built. But holding them now, I felt something tighten in my chest again. Not pain, just memory. I thought about the boy who wanted to teach. The man who never tried. And the father who gave everything to make sure his kids wouldn't have to choose the way he did. I realized then that my children didn't just not know what I gave up. They didn't know who I had been. And if I was honest, that was partly my fault. I had taught them, without ever meaning to, that my life had been simple, that I had wanted nothing more than what I had. That sacrifice was just part of the job, not something worth talking about. I folded the papers carefully and put them back in the box, but I didn't slide it back into the closet. I left it by the chair. For the first time in my life, I started to wonder, what would happen if I told them? I didn't sleep much that night. I kept seeing that box in my mind, sitting by the chair like it was watching me, waiting for me to do something I had never done before. Speak, not as a father giving advice, not as the quiet man who kept everything running, but as myself. By morning, I still hadn't decided. I made coffee, sat at the table, stared at the steam rising from the mug, and told myself all the reasons not to say anything. They're busy. They've got their own lives. What good would it do now? I didn't want pity. I didn't want to sound like I was complaining. I had made my choices. No one had forced me. But another voice, quieter but steadier, kept coming back. They should know. Not so they'd feel guilty. Not so they'd thank me. But so they'd understand. So that when they looked at me, they wouldn't just see the man who fixed things and paid bills. They'd see the boy who loved books, the young man who had dreams, the father who chose them, again and again, even when it cost him something he never talked about. By noon, I had made up my mind. I called Mark first, told him I wasn't feeling great, and asked if he could come visit the following weekend. There was a pause on the line, the kind where you can almost hear someone rearranging their schedule in their head. "Of course, Dad," he said. "Is everything okay?" "It will be," I said. "I just want to see you." Then I called Claire and said the same thing. She hesitated too, but then she said she'd drive in from Chicago and make a weekend of it. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. It felt like I had set something in motion that I couldn't stop. The days leading up to their visit passed slowly. I cleaned the house more than it needed, bought groceries I wasn't sure we'd even eat, took the box out and put it back in the closet twice, then finally left it by the chair again, like a promise I was making to myself. When Mark arrived, he looked tired but happy to see me. He hugged me tight in the driveway and said, "You look good, Dad." I smiled and told him he was lying, but I appreciated it anyway. Claire came a few hours later, her car packed like she might be staying a month instead of a weekend. She rushed up and wrapped her arms around me, smelling like perfume and the road. For a little while, everything felt normal. We ordered takeout. We talked about their jobs, the kids, the weather. I listened more than I spoke, like always. The house was louder than it had been in a long time, and part of me just wanted to let that be enough. But the box was still there. After dinner, when the plates were cleared and the room grew quieter, I stood up and said, "There's something I want to show you." They both looked at me, curious. I walked over to the chair and picked up the box, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "What's that?" Claire asked. "Just some old things," I said, "from a long time ago." I sat down and opened it, lifting out the papers one by one. I showed them the transcripts, the letter from the counselor, the half-filled application. I watched their faces as they tried to make sense of it. "I wanted to go to college," I said quietly, "to be a teacher." They stared at me. "You never told us that," Mark said. "I know," I said. I didn't think it mattered anymore. Claire picked up one of the papers, reading it carefully. "You would have been a great teacher," she said softly. Something in her voice almost broke me. I took a deep breath and kept going. I told them about quitting school, about the machine shop, about how scared I'd been when money got tight, when they were little, when everything felt like it could fall apart if I let go for even a moment. I told them about the overtime, the missed games, the nights I sat in my truck because I didn't know how to bring all that tired inside with me. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad," I said. I don't think you ever knew who I was before I was just Dad." They were quiet. Mark looked down at his hands. Claire had tears in her eyes. "I thought," Mark said slowly, "I thought you were just content, like you never wanted anything else." I nodded. I told myself that too, for a long time, but the truth is I wanted something. I just wanted you more. Claire reached over and took my hand. "Dad," she whispered, "I had no idea." We sat there for a moment, the three of us, surrounded by old papers and quiet. And then Mark said something I didn't expect. "I complain about work all the time," he said, "about how hard it is, about the stress. And I never once thought about what you went through. You didn't even have a choice, did you?" I shook my head. "Not really. Not if I wanted to keep us afloat." He swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for having my life, but for never asking about yours. Those words hit me harder than anything else that night. Not thank you, not praise, just I'm sorry I never asked. Claire squeezed my hand. We see you now, she said. We really do. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't even realized I was missing. Scene. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I stayed up alone in the living room for a long time. The house was quiet again, but it felt different than it usually did. Fuller, like something had been put back where it belonged. I sat in my chair, the box on the table in front of me, and thought about everything I'd said, about everything I'd kept inside for so many years. I didn't feel lighter exactly. You don't shed a lifetime in one evening, but I felt settled, like a long-held breath had finally been let out. For the first time, I wasn't carrying it alone. The next morning, we had breakfast together, the three of us sitting around the small kitchen table like we used to when they were kids. Mark made pancakes, burning the first batch the way he always had. Claire laughed and teased him about it, and for a moment it felt like time had folded in on itself. But something was different. They looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with guilt, with curiosity, with respect. They asked questions about my parents, about the shop, about what it was really like back then. Not in a rushed way, not checking their phones every few minutes, but really listening. And I answered, sometimes with humor, sometimes with pauses when the words were harder to find. I told them stories I had never thought to tell before because I hadn't believed anyone wanted to hear them. When Mark washed the dishes, he said, "You know, Dad, I think about quitting my job sometimes, doing something that actually means something to me. I'm scared, though." I looked at him and said, "Being scared doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it matters. Just make sure you don't wake up one day wishing you tried." He nodded slowly, like he was tucking those words away for later. Before Claire left, she hugged me longer than usual. "You should have told us sooner," she said, "but I'm glad you told us now." "So am I said. When the weekend ended and they drove away, I stood on the porch and watched their cars disappear down the street, just like I always did. But this time, the quiet that followed didn't feel quite so heavy. We talked more after that. Not every day. They were still busy, still living their lives. But when they called, they asked about me, about my stories, about what I was reading, about what I thought. And sometimes they told me about their struggles too, not just the surface things, but the doubts underneath. It felt like we were meeting each other in the middle now, instead of talking across a distance we didn't know how to cross before. A few weeks later, a package arrived in the mail. Inside was a book Mark had picked out for me, a history book, thick and heavy, with a note tucked inside the cover. "Thought you might like this. For the teacher you would have been. Love, Mark." I sat there holding that book for a long time, my eyes burning, my throat tight. It wasn't about the book. It was about being known. That's the part I never realized I wanted. Not gratitude, not praise, just to be known. My children don't know every single thing I gave up for them. They probably never will. And that's okay. Some sacrifices are meant to stay quiet, but now they know enough. They know that their father had dreams, that he made choices, that his life was more than just a job and a role. And I know something too. I know that telling them didn't take anything away from them. It only brought us closer. Some evenings now, I sit at the kitchen table with my coffee and think about that young man I used to be, standing in a library, dreaming about a classroom full of kids and a chalkboard covered in words. I don't feel regret the way I used to. I feel gratitude. Gratitude that I got to raise two good people. Gratitude that I lived long enough to finally tell my story. If I could say one thing to the man I was back then, it would be this. You won't get the life you imagined, but you'll get a life that matters. And to anyone listening to this, anyone who's carrying something quiet inside, something you think no one needs to hear, I'd say this too. Your story matters, even if you think it's too late. My children don't know everything I gave up for them, but now they know me. And for a man like me, that's enough.